On April 8, 1943, high above occupied France at nearly 27,000 feet, Luftwaffe ace Oberleutnant Ralph Hermiken looked down through the clear canopy of his Fock Wolf 190 and smiled as a formation of unfamiliar American fighters clawed their way upward. Slow, heavy, and seemingly out of place in the thin air, and to the experienced German pilots who had been fighting nonstop since 1939, the sight was almost funny. These bulky Republic P-47 Thunderbolts rising like overloaded cargo planes, their massive radial engines straining, their thick fuselages and stubby wings making them look more like flying barrels than fighters, prompting jokes over the radio about milk bottles sent by an enemy who clearly did not understand air combat. Yet, what none of the Germans circling above could have known was that they were witnessing the arrival of the aircraft that would, piece by piece, dismantle the Luftwaffe itself, because within a year and a half those same clumsy shapes would become symbols of death, defined by the sound of 8 synchronized 50 caliber machine guns firing in unison, unleashing a storm of lead unlike anything German pilots had ever faced. And that transformation began that very morning when Major Donald Blakesley, leading American Thunderbolts on their first combat missions, realized survival required abandoning every dogfighting instinct learned in lighter fighters. Because the P-47 was not built to turn tightly or climb delicately, but to dominate through mass, speed, altitude, and firepower. A philosophy born in panic back in 1940 when Republic Aviation designer Alexander Kartveli was ordered to create a high-altitude interceptor capable of meeting Germany's best, resulting in a machine so large even its creators called it a dinosaur, a fighter powered by the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp that could maintain full power where enemy engines choked for air, using a complex turbo supercharger buried deep in the fuselage to deliver sea-level performance in the stratosphere. Though this strength came at a cost, as early Thunderbolts killed more American pilots in training than Germans did in combat, plagued by brutal torque on takeoff, vicious landing behavior, and terrifying high-speed dives that locked controls. Yet, those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary. A fighter that did not need finesse, because it could absorb punishment no other aircraft could survive. A truth Germans slowly learned the hard way as Thunderbolts returned riddled with holes that would have shattered Messerschmitts or Spitfires. Radial engines still running, pilots still alive, and when the P-47's guns finally found a target, the results were devastating. 8 heavy machine guns, converging hundreds of rounds per second into a small space, enough firepower to tear an enemy aircraft apart in moments, a lesson driven home on June 26, 1943, when Lieutenant Robert Johnson's Thunderbolt was shredded by cannon fire, wounded pilot trapped inside a burning cockpit, only to remain airborne despite catastrophic damage, absorbing everything a German fighter could throw at it. Even surviving repeated point-blank attacks from a stunned enemy pilot who eventually pulled alongside, stared in disbelief, saluted, and broke away out of ammunition, leaving Johnson to limp home in an aircraft that should not have existed. A moment that sent shockwaves through both air forces and forced German intelligence to confront the impossible. And as American pilots learned to exploit altitude and dive speed rather than turning fights, the Thunderbolt's weight became a weapon, allowing it to dive faster than anything else in the sky, strike with overwhelming force, and climb back to safety while German fighters were left helpless below. A tactic that turned formations of P-47s into executioners raining destruction from above. Especially evident during deep raids into Germany, where bomber destroyers and interceptors alike were erased in seconds by concentrated streams of fire, wings snapping, fuselages disintegrating, crews never knowing what hit them. And by late 1943, German aces who once mocked the Thunderbolt were dying beneath it, including some of the Reich's most experienced pilots caught at altitudes their engines could no longer handle, while new Thunderbolt variants with massive paddle, blade, propellers erased earlier weaknesses, climbing faster, accelerating harder, and producing a deep, rolling thunder that ground troops learned to fear, a sound that meant rockets, bombs, and machine gunfire were about to erase anything moving below, as P-47s evolved into the most destructive fighter bombers of the war, smashing railways, convoys, armor, and entire columns of vehicles in single passes, turning daylight movement into suicide and forcing German armies to crawl only at night. Yet even then, they were hunted. And on D-Day, the skies belonged entirely to Thunderbolts stacked from sea level to the edge of the stratosphere, annihilating any German attempt to reach the beaches, a dominance repeated across Europe and mirrored in the Pacific, where the same rugged aircraft proved equally lethal against Japanese fighters unprepared for its durability and firepower. While later Thunderbolts even claimed jet kills, diving from altitude fast enough to catch early Me-262s during moments of vulnerability, proving that even speed could not save an aircraft caught in the P-47's firing envelope. And as the war ground on the true reason for the Thunderbolt's success became impossible to ignore, not just engineering brilliance but industrial scale, factories producing one aircraft per hour, ammunition plants churning out tens of millions of rounds per month, fuel flowing endlessly, pilots trained longer and better than their enemies could afford, losses replaced instantly while German units faded into shadows. A reality captured perfectly when a German pilot mock-destroyed Thunderbolts on the ground only to be told they would be replaced tomorrow, while his dead comrades could not be. And by 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely in memory, its remaining pilots facing impossible odds, encountering Thunderbolt formations that erased entire units in seconds, leaving burning wreckage and parachutes drifting through silent skies. The psychological toll so severe that even veteran pilots felt physical fear at the sound of approaching engines. And when post-war German assessments were recovered, they told the entire story in cold progression, from laughing at a clumsy American fighter, to acknowledging a serious threat, to finally labeling the P-47 the most dominant fighter bomber of the war, a judgment echoed decades later by former enemies who admitted they had misunderstood everything, that America had not tried to build a European fighter, but a machine designed for endurance, punishment, and overwhelming firepower, a flying embodiment of industrial logic. And in the end, the Thunderbolt did not win by elegance or clever maneuvering, but by rewriting the rules of survival, pointing its guns, pulling the trigger, and ensuring that when those guns spoke, there was nothing left to argue with. Because the laughter that greeted the P-47 in 1943 had vanished by 1945, replaced by silence, wreckage, and the unmistakable understanding that the thunder had decided the war in the sky.